what we decided to do was ask the question, what happens to young people with autism as they age into adulthood? Because the fact is, in an average lifespan that may last 70, 80, 90 years, the majority of one's life is spent in adulthood, not very young childhood. Autism doesn't go away when people become teenagers or young adults. It's a persistent, lifelong condition. The need for assistance and supports lasts into adulthood. However, the way services and policies in the United States are organized, people are essentially pushed off a cliff once they exit high school. When students are in high school, they qualify for help through special education. Once they age out of high school eligibility, they no longer get those supports and services. So we found a tremendously high rate of service disengagement in a population that continues to have very high needs. There was a dramatic drop-off in access to services, most notably mental health services, speech therapy services, medical evaluation and assessment services, and case management services. In fact, the percentage of young people with autism out of high school who were not getting any of those services was about 40%. That's a very high rate of disengagement for a population of young people who have very high and persistent abiding needs. Among the young adults with autism after high school, 9% were receiving speech therapy services, 35% were receiving mental health or psychological counseling services, 24% were receiving some kind of medical evaluation services, and 42% were receiving case management services. Another important finding in our study was that the outcomes were especially poor for African American young adults and young adults with autism from low-income families. So the likelihood of not being engaged in any services was much higher for those subpopulations. Perhaps the most distressing number of all those factoids I just recited is the very low prevalence of speech therapy services. So one of the core issues in autism is a difficulty with communication, language, and social interaction using language. It's one of the diagnostic hallmarks of getting a diagnosis of autism. And while young people are in school, speech therapy services is the most prevalent service received. About 75% of students in school in special ed are getting speech therapy services because it's the central challenge of many of these young people is social communication. Once they leave high school, only 9% are getting speech therapy services. So there's a dramatic drop-off in the percentage of young people who are getting access to speech therapy, meaning that they are cut off from the one service that they probably need the most, because the need for help with social communication and coaching about how to interact appropriately using language doesn't go away. And in fact, it becomes even more consequential. You know, if a young person with autism wants to hold a job, wants to go to college, wants to go to vocational school, the need to interact with other people becomes even more crucial than it was during high school.